Hello and welcome to the 15-minute show, part of the Arsenal Therapy podcast. I'm your host, Adam Keys, and today we are going to have a bit of a deep dive into Ivan Toney, Victor Osimhen, and Gabriel Jesus. So it's a pretty quiet window by all accounts. Tottenham are the only team that have really bought anyone. And as far as Arsenal news goes, the main news and the main stories are coming out of Dubai with injury updates and so on. Even that's been pretty quiet. We've seen that Thomas Partey is back amongst the squad. We don't know exactly whenever he's going to be fit. However, it is expected that he could be in the squad against Forest on the 30th, which is something that I've been saying for a while, that I thought pure gut instinct with absolutely no medical background could be the date that he returns. And my thinking behind that was that Ghana play on the 14th, 18th and 22nd of January. So having Thomas Partey back, he would be unlikely to come back during Ghana's run. Otherwise, he would have gone to the AFCON. So realistically, the 30th seems doable for Thomas Partey. And I think we should have more than enough to get past Palace without him. And having him in the squad for Forest will be a big, big lift for Arsenal. So we also have Fabio Vieira back. That's a big boost for us. But the overall, in terms of incomings, there isn't a lot of news right now. We've seen links to Zubimendi, Joshua Zirkzee, who we did a video on Thursday, Amadou Onana, who we covered last week. These players have all been linked, and we know Onana and Zubimendi are fairly long-term targets of Arsenal. We've been interested in them for a significant length of time, and Zubimendi's one that we may well get done in the summer. There is a lot of talk that he will leave Sociedad. However, he does not want to leave before the Champions League, and he wants to see out this season. That is what we're hearing right now on that one. So it's also a release clause, which we know has to be paid in full. So that deal isn't a huge transfer fee. However, with the release clause being paid in 150 million lump, it makes it very difficult to do with an FFP-tied club in January. And one of the things that I think fans need to remember with FFP is it runs in 3-year cycles. So FFP will be reset in June. And if we mess it up now, we will end up back in a cycle that will keep us running for a significant period of time. So that will have long-term future impact. But the big news is the strikers. It's not really news. It's something that we've discussed for a long time. And we're going to have a look into Ivan Toney, Victor Osimhen, and how they compare to Gabriel Jesus. So we're going to run through some slides on these guys, look at some of their numbers. I've watched a lot of Ivan Toney. I've watched less of Victor Osimhen because unfortunately, I don't have time to watch Serie A every week. However, I do know enough about him. I regularly watch kind of what I can of Napoli and their highlights and so on. So I see a fair bit of his finishing, his goal scoring and so on. And I've done a lot of deep dives into the numbers behind these players beyond what you'll see here today. So the two of them, we know Arsenal are interested in them. However, Fabrizio Romano has recently said Osimhen is not on the market. He's not available, and many other strikers are not available right now. Ivan Toney is a player that Arsenal appreciate. It's true from what we're hearing. Toney would love the move to Arsenal. We know that he went on the Diary of a CEO podcast and basically told Stephen Bartlett that he would love to sign for Arsenal. That he is a Liverpool fan, but he loves watching Arsenal play. The financial package is too high for Arsenal at the minute. It is important to realise that Ivan Toney has 18 months left on his contract. Right now, Brentford are getting themselves into a relegation battle. Brian Mbeumo suffered a long-term injury, and Ivan Toney is extremely important to them. So for Brentford to sell Ivan Toney, they would need a significant fee and to be able to go out and buy someone else that would really give them a charge. One of the things that with Toney coming back, you would say it pretty much guarantees survival for Brentford this season. And I don't see any kind of doubts that Brentford would go down. I think they're far too good for that. Thomas Frank is far, far too good of a coach. But it's one of those, look, this is football and madder things have happened. So I think it's one of those, with the 18 months left right now, Brentford are able to demand what they want. However, in the summer, Toney will have 12 months left. And unless he signs a new contract, which I would imagine will only happen if he doesn't see any sight of him getting a big move, because we know he wants that. He's going to be 28 this summer. He turns 28 in 2 months, actually. So this is Toney's only chance of getting a move to a top club. He's also been out for 8 months, which will make him even hungrier. Look, one of the things with Ivan Toney, I have repeatedly said I don't think Toney is elite. I think he's an excellent player, but one of the things that I think that is used against him is his age. However, with strikers especially, a lot of strikers are developing a lot later. And my theory behind that is that strikers now play as that role, that low nine role. Back in the day of 4-4-2 and so on, the likes of, even towards the end of that, the likes of Van Persie came through in a two up front. So you had that partner. You didn't have to do that whole hold up role yourself. You had another player beside you that helped with that. And now you're essentially responsible for competing with two centre backs every game, which is extremely difficult, tiring. It involves a lot of physicality. And then on top of all that, you have to put the ball in the back of the net. So, but with Toney, he's had to work his way back up through the leagues. He doesn't have a huge amount of miles at the top level in the tank. He's played the majority of his games in the Championship. He's only had 2 seasons in the Premier League. And this season, he's had 8 months off. And I think it's important to remember this isn't 8 months off with an injury. This is a guy that's sitting fired up and hungry, that feels like he's been harshly treated and is ready to go. So essentially, that's 8 months off with him trying to get himself in his best shape. And with a player as hungry as Ivan Toney, there is no doubt that he is analysing every area of his game to see where he can improve. But look, so the age thing isn't as big of a factor to me as it is with others, because I think you probably get 4 good years out of Ivan Toney. That said, you're not paying 100 million for that. If Ivan Toney is to sign for Arsenal, it would have to be around the 50-60 million mark, and I will go into my reasons why. So firstly, let's have a look at their numbers. So obviously Ivan Toney hasn't played this season. So first graph that you'll see is a comparison between Toney last season with Jesus and Osimhen this season. So Toney played 33 games last season, scored 20 goals, and we know 6 of those goals were penalties. Gabriel Jesus is having an awful season in front of goal. I don't think there's any way to gloss over that. I think we just have to be very blunt about that. 15 games, 3 goals in the Premier League. That is unacceptable, especially when you look at the chances that Jesus has missed this season. And his overall game just isn't what it was. By contrast, Victor Osimhen, 13 games, 7 goals. Again, that isn't an unbelievable record. If you look at someone like Haaland, he's hitting double those numbers comfortably. Mo Salah's scoring a lot more goals than this. So I think it's important to remember Victor Osimhen is a top class striker, but he has suffered a lot with injury this season. And he's a player that he does miss chances. He's not he's not an Erling Haaland. He's much closer in my eyes to Didier Drogba. And look, I love Drogba. I hated Drogba at the same time. He was a player that I hated Arsenal playing against because he gave everything in that 9 position. He was a real winner. And there's a lot of similarities between Osimhen and Drogba, down to how they take the ball on the halfway line, their control. They both have a tendency for a bit of a loose touch, but they're 2 players that kind of have that ability to recover that end product and so on. But to be fair with this, I brought up comparisons between the 3 of them last season so that we could look at their numbers, and I also looked at their per 90. So this is Toney's per 90 last season in comparison to Jesus and Osimhen this season. So as you can see, Osimhen and Toney have exactly the same goals per 90. Osimhen this season, Toney last season. Jesus, none of these stats except passing are overly favourable towards him, and he has attempted more passes per 90 than the other 2. And you can see from these numbers, Osimhen is an extremely low touch player in comparison to both Toney and Jesus. So when we look at the comparisons last season, this is probably the fairest comparison of the three players. Toney, 33 games played, 20 goals, 6 of which were penalties. Jesus, we know he had that long-term knee injury, and a lot of that was coming back. We did expect more goals because we put some of his form down to the recovery from injury. However, he's had 2 injuries, 3 injuries already this season, which doesn't make for good reading for Gabriel Jesus. But none of these stats last year are more favourable to him than either Toney or Osimhen. So you look passes completed, Toney outperforms him. You look at goals, Osimhen significantly outperforms him and Toney. Toney's managed more minutes than both of them, and one more game than Osimhen, because Toney's a player that has generally got very high availability. He doesn't pick up many injuries, and that is a stark contrast to Jesus and Osimhen. When you look at their extended numbers a bit more, and we look at the goals, as I've said, Toney scored 6 penalties last year, so only 14 of those goals were from open play. But what's interesting is all 26 of Osimhen's goals came from inside the box. And when you look at Ivan Toney, he scored 3 goals from outside the box. He scored 2 headers. Osimhen scored 7 headers. And I think that the headed goals from Toney's an actual very, very interesting stat, because he's a player that a lot of people think, having Ivan Toney, he's a superb early dominant player that can get in, and with Saka's crossing ability, Odegaard's ability to put that ball in the box, having someone like an Ivan Toney in the squad gives you the ability to have someone attacking that and really getting on the backs of defenders. Ivan Toney's only scored 2 goals with his head last season. A lot of his goals come in and around the box, where he targets that 6-yard box and he really attacks the ball. Again, Arsenal have a lot of loose balls in this area, and that is something that we miss. Victor Osimhen is very similar. And what's interesting is you look at Toney and Osimhen, the two of them have very, very similar conversion rates. So Toney's is slightly better, but we're talking a very, very marginal difference. By contrast, Jesus has had a 19% conversion rate last season. This year, he's down to around 9%, which is simply unacceptable for a player of his level. And what's very interesting is Toney had a lot more passes than Gabriel Jesus last season. So Toney actually averaged nearly 10 touches per game more than Jesus, which is something that you wouldn't think of. And given the way Brentford play, a lot of long balls went down to Toney. So you would expect him to be competing in the air for a lot, whereas Jesus, you expect him to be taking the ball in defeat. Jesus is actually a very underrated target man. He has the ability to take the ball down and really scrap with defenders. But we know the relationship with Raya and Toney. We know that's something Arteta wants to exploit more. But the numbers themselves are actually very favourable towards Ivan Toney, and especially in comparison to Jesus. And again, when you look at these numbers overall, Toney is coming out very much in favour. And you look at what these guys are doing this year, and you compare again. Toney's numbers are difficult because they are all from last season. So we've got one real sample size from Ivan Toney, whereas the others are being judged over a larger period of time. But the big thing is Gabriel Jesus, 2 of his 3 goals this season have come with his head, and 2 of Osimhen's 7 have come with his head. So it's interesting, if you want a player that's going to score goals with his head in the box in a crowded penalty area, Osimhen appears to be the answer. What Osimhen also gives you over an Ivan Toney is raw pace. He's a handful. He's a player that really, really loves playing off the shoulder. And yes, Arsenal play a very high possession game, but what people don't realise is there's transitional periods in every game. If you look at the number of goals City scored over the years, despite having 60, 70, 80% of possession, a long ball straight from Ederson into Mahrez, and that ball goes, and they're in the box, bang, goal. You need players that are comfortable on the transition. And that's something that I think Arsenal would really benefit from Osimhen. He's a player that his ceiling's extremely high. He's someone that is still got a lot of development to go. Whereas Ivan Toney is a player that I believe is playing close to his ceiling and will get better with better players around him. However, it's important to remember that the Brentford setup is tailored to Ivan Toney. If Arsenal sign Toney, he's not going to be the star man. He's going to be a very, very good player in the Arsenal team. But in comparison to Osimhen, he would be coming in as one of the stars, the cherry on top, the man that the team serve and score goals through. I don't believe Ivan Toney would be that player. And if you look at his per 90 numbers, again, a lot of them come out very, very similar to Osimhen. However, the big thing, and I think again it's important to look at, is Toney's conversion rate is actually better than the two of these. However, Osimhen's pace and power does lead to more shots from him and ultimately has led to a lot more goals. So when we look at these players in comparison, I think Ivan Toney's someone that there's no doubt about what he brings. He's someone that I think every Arsenal fan would be happy with. Is he elite? Probably not. And for me, the closest comparison we can give for Ivan Toney is to Harry Kane. And that's not to say the two of them are in the same ballpark. Kane is a level above, and he's someone that has carried some very, very average Spurs teams over the years and led to them punching well above their weight. But where Toney and Kane are comparable is their style of play, in that they're both players that like to get the ball, really bring their wingers into play, and then to hit the box, like to get in, will attack that 6-yard area and will score a lot of goals around there. They're also both very good ball strikers. The difference is Kane is a level above arguably in every area. He's a better passer than Toney. He's a better finisher than Toney, whereas Toney's probably a player that has a better aerial ability than Kane. But that said, Kane has scored a lot more headers than Toney within the box. So for me, if we're going to go for someone like Ivan Toney, the reason I say 50 to 60 million is firstly because he will have 12 months on his contract. Secondly, because he's 28 years old. Thirdly, he's a player that's playing close to his ceiling and isn't going to get that much better than he currently is in comparison to Osimhen, who's a player that has guided his side to a title. He's someone that's proven he knows how to win. He can see out a full Serie A season, and the pressure somewhere like Napoli is vast. And Osimhen's really taken that team on his back and won them a title. So that winning mentality is something that we don't know if Ivan Toney has. Whereas Osimhen, yes, he's not Premier League proven, but he's shown he can do it at that level. And lastly, with Ivan Toney, I think if you're bringing him in, you need a pacey, robust, explosive winger, because Ivan Toney doesn't give you the pace. I think with Osimhen, yes, we would want a winger, but we maybe don't have to go with someone as high of a quality. Whereas I think if we buy Ivan Toney, we need that real pacey winger that we can really get to push Martinelli and Saka. And this is the thing, those two are in their comfort zone right now. They're not being pushed for places. And we love both of them. We know how good they are. But having that raw pace on the side, Toney won't give you it. It's something that we're lacking, and it's something that can't be coached. So the pro of bringing in Toney is you can spend more on that winger and look at someone that really adds quality. The downside is Toney doesn't give you that pace. He is close to his ceiling. And if you go for a Victor Osimhen, he will keep growing, and he's likely not to hit his peak for another 2 or 3 years. And whilst Osimhen's finishing is arguably a bit more erratic than Toney's, he hits the numbers. He hits a lot more shots. He scores more goals as a result. And Toney has only one good season at the top level. So I think it's one of those. Toney wouldn't be a bad signing for Arsenal, but the question is he elite? And ultimately, I would say he's probably not. But that said, I don't think he would be a bad signing for Arsenal. So thank you to everyone that's joined. Please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button and keep joining the show every Tuesday and Friday. Have a great day. Thanks, guys.